Hello, I am thinking that we can get started. I am Holly Maples, and I am very much looking forward to our first panel after lunch, which is Saying No, Self-Empowerment and Self-Care Amongst Freelancers in the Pandemic. And I'll introduce the speakers, but just to say briefly that one thing I find very interesting about this is how much I think you get ingrained into you, or perhaps brainwashed, to not say no, ever. To be terrified of not taking work, to be terrified of going on vacation, to feel like anything that you say no to is a missed opportunity. And the problem is sometimes it's true. I did an absolutely horrible production which I knew when I said yes to it that it was going to be horrible. And yet it led to other things down the road. So it's very hard sometimes to put yourself first, I think, as a freelancer, but also as a member of the theater industry, and really think about how do you take care of yourself when your identity is so wrapped up in your work. And what we found with our interviews and the surveys, as well as the micro commissions, which we have some of our speakers today from, was that this was a problem for many people. And they felt that over COVID, the forced pause made them want to advocate more for themselves and perhaps think, oh my God, I matter. Which is crazy. So today we're going to have a really exciting conversation with three very exciting people about this issue of self-care and saying no as a radical act of empowerment for freelancers in the industry. So I'm going to start with Phoebe Rhodes, who is a theater director and an actor trainer from Devon. She trained as an actor at the London College of Music and graduated with a first-class degree and was the Young Vic in the Almeida Theater as a director. She's also a Soho Theatre Writers Lab alumni. And as an artist, Phoebe worked across the UK in venues such as Liverpool Everyman, Theatre Royal Plymouth, Southwark Playhouse, Pleasance Theatre, Theatre 503, and the Bunker Theatre. As an actor trainer, Phoebe's worked in 3 drama schools and universities over the last 2 years, including the London College of Music, Fourth Monkey, and Plymouth Margin University. So over to you, Phoebe, and I'm excited to hear what you have to say.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Phoebe. Really excited to be here. I'm just going to share my screen with everybody, if that's okay. So it's the classic, can everybody see my screen? Okay, good. Thank you. 1 second. Okay, so this is my presentation. So we're going to be covering saying no, self-empowerment and self-care amongst freelancers in the pandemic. So this is me. I'm a freelance theatre director, actor, trainer and coach. I'm originally from Devon. I lived in London for many, many years. And during the pandemic, actually, I came back to Plymouth and I absolutely love it here. I'm really excited about the work that's being made. The majority of my theatre directing work has been in new writing. I love collaborating with writers and making something new and telling new stories. Artist development is really at the heart of what I do in all of my work with professionals and with training actors as well, and that's really important to me. I'm really interested in general, I would say, about self-empowerment and self-care for freelancers. So it's really exciting for me to be part of this conversation today. And there's my website, phoeberhodes.com, if you fancy finding out a little bit more. So has my self-care and agency as a freelancer shifted over the past 2 years? I would say 1,000,000%. Like, for so many people, and not just theatre freelancers, things have shifted, our priorities have become different, things are more important. We're thinking about health and happiness. And things, yeah, definitely have really changed for me. I'm really trying to balance, if not prioritize, well-being alongside work, and trying to weigh, you know, pursuing my career and absolutely being ambitious and driven and all of those things, but thinking about self-care and balance and well-being and kind of weighing all of that up together, do you know, things not coming out of balance. I'm really trying to be a mental health advocate. I would say I've always been, but more so, and just trying to be really vocal about that and really having those conversations with all of the people I work with, casting creatives and new connections and all of those kinds of things, and really that being a constant conversation. And I would say well-being becoming truly ingrained as part of my practice, not that something that's kind of chucked in, but it's becoming ingrained. It's really a part of what I do. So what am I doing to bring self-care and self-empowerment into my work with training and professional actors? Because both of those things are really important to what I do. So a couple of things I do, I make sure to do check-ins and check-outs where everybody gets to speak uninterrupted, with everybody actively listening to them, talking about how they feel, anything they want to talk about for as long as they like. And that's something I always do. And that's a really lovely time for everybody getting their chance to speak about anything they want to, even if they don't want to talk about much, that's fine as well. But having that chance to be heard, I think is really important. Open conversations about everything, not just to do with well-being, although of course that's really important, but everything kind of being an open space and everybody kind of being on, you know, the same level and working in like not a hierarchical way. A sense of true collaboration and not just being a buzzword, but everybody owning the work and everybody being part of the process, and everyone being part of the feedback, and everybody figuring out together what's the journey and what do we need next, and what, you know, everybody always being part of those conversations. Sensitive communication and like careful choice of language and things like that, I think that's really important, and not just with training actors, with professionals as well. And that the things you say have a massive impact on you, not just as an artist but as a human, and I think I really try to pay attention to that. And then in rehearsal, class, making myself approachable and available to have those conversations, those check-ins, those things that people just want to talk about and to kind of one-on-one. And then artist development, which is something I've mentioned too. There being a real true commitment to helping humans grow as well as artists, and that sense of rehearsal or class or acting or rehearsals and theatre and all that stuff being really, really important, but also all of that stuff that's going on outside. It's very hard to leave at the door. Do you know what? I'm not saying it feeds into the work, but there's an awareness and that you can take care of everybody in the room when we can talk about it and be open with that. So what do we need to do to safeguard ourselves in the industry? A kind of couple of thoughts. Wellbeing conversations included as part of all rehearsals, and this not just being for the cast benefit, but all creatives in the project. So those kinds of check-ins and check-outs I mentioned, often that's just, you know, sometimes it's the director and the cast do, but I make sure that everybody is involved, all of the designers, producers, you know, everybody that's involved is always part of that conversation, really part of that collaboration and that team, and making sure that everybody is heard. Wellbeing practitioners, I think, would be amazing, you know, having them accessible when working for buildings and organizations. But, you know, if we could have something free for freelancers as well, some kind of resource for us to reach out to and something to lean on, I think that would be invaluable. Something around a sick policy. I think the pandemic has really raised this for quite a lot of us, but a fair sick policy in contracts which holds mental health kind of the same importance as physical health, and something in there that makes us feel a little bit held and supported, because as freelancers, often if we do the work we get paid, but then if we're sick or something happens we don't get paid and we don't do the work, and I think that's really, really scary and makes us want to push on even if we're not feeling well, especially with to do with mental health. So something there, I think there's something to do with a sick policy. And then kind of taking all of that into account, kind of a genuine shift in theatre where we don't just talk a lot about mental health and make shows about mental health, but we really take care of those actually making the work. And I think that's a conversation and a shift, and I think that's all of these things I'm talking about, practitioners, a policy, you know, these open conversations, these check-ins, these everybody owning the work, you know, I think all of that kind of stuff is encompassed in that. Is no a dirty word? Holly kind of touched on this a little bit, this idea of saying yes, you know, say yes to everything, and in lots of ways that's really positive and that's really exciting and productive, and yes, we, you know, saying yes can be really brilliant, but also it can also sometimes become a little bit toxic and a bit scary, and the fear of not saying yes and not embracing those opportunities make you feel like you're failing, perhaps. Prioritizing other things apart from work again can feel like you're failing. So again, finding balance for me is about finding balance. It's about weighing things up. You know, this is a great opportunity, but how about all these other things I need to take into account, you know, to do with me and my life kind of outside of theatre. And Holly was saying there about us being quite theatre being very a part of our identity. I think that's really interesting, and I agree with that. It's very hard to separate yourself, and I think I'm trying to in some way, like finding that balance between Phoebe and the theatre and that kind of stuff I do, but then Phoebe, you know, apart from that, you know, prioritizing well-being, you know, joy, spending time with friends and family, you know, hobbies. I love pottery, you know, that downtime, weighing up what's going to keep you happy and healthy. And of course we want to be ambitious and driven, and all of that stuff is wonderful, but kind of balancing that up and figuring out what's the best thing to do. It's really difficult. It's a process. I'm not there yet. I'm trying to figure it out, like most of us. But in turn, I think in doing that, it will make me a better, more energized, more creative, more thoughtful artist when I have the space to take care of me, and I can make better work. I think that's kind of my hope. And that's a brief overview there. So thank you so much for having me, and I will pass you back over to Holly. Thank you.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much for staying in time, and really, really great discussion. I think it's just very important, like you say, for us to advocate for our mental health, and also provide safe spaces where people can share and have these kind of a kind of radical thought process of care that should be incorporated into all of our work. That feels like it's suddenly a discussion, and it's not a virtue to deny your own needs and be in the industry. And why would that ever make you a better artist or human being? So moving on to Isabel Dixon. Isabel Dixon is a playwright and dramaturg from the Southwest, now based in London. She is particularly passionate about work and strong female characters, experimental form and structure, and a healthy dose of pop culture references. She was part of the Royal Court and Lyric Hammersmith Young Writers Program and Soho Theatre Writers Lab. Her work has been performed, read, and developed as theaters, including the Old Vic, the Arcola, Rich Mix, and BAFTA. Isabel was the recipient of the 2019 Adaptive Playwright Award, during which she developed her latest play, Kaleidoscopes, and is currently completing a writer on attachment placement at the RSC. Thank you so much, Isabel.
Hi, everyone. Sorry about that. Just trying to unmute myself there. That was fun. Still not very good at technology 2 years into this, which, yeah, says a lot about me. I thought I'd just give a really brief overview of who I am. I don't have slides like Phoebe, so now putting way less professional. That was so great. Thank you so much. I'm a freelance writer and dramaturg, as Holly mentioned. Obviously, that doesn't pay a huge amount of money. So I also do a number of other jobs in the theatre industry and spin a lot of plates. One of the main things I do is theatre marketing. So working with a lot of particularly kind of emerging and mid-career theatre companies on marketing shows. That's something I kind of started doing more of in the pandemic, which I'll kind of briefly touch on in a minute. I actually went freelance not long before the pandemic, and that was interesting for a number of reasons. I've been working really hard at a full-time job in theatre marketing. I used to be marketing manager at Pleasance, so I worked there until kind of 2018, and realised I really wanted to make time for my writing. It was something that I was very much doing in evenings and weekends, and trying to kind of build a career while also working full-time, which was incredibly stressful. And I can probably look back and say that I didn't really say no to anything ever at that point. So 70, 80-hour weeks are pretty common, because I was not only managing the marketing for a venue, and a venue that did London and Edinburgh, so kind of doing Edinburgh Fringe and manning a venue down here, but also trying to have a career alongside that and make work, which was crazy. I think there was a kind of particularly memorable week where it was an Edinburgh on sale, and I was doing a show that I'd written, but we didn't have the money to pay a stage manager, so I was also upping it. So I would literally leave work, get in a cab, go to the theatre, do the show, come home. And that was pretty standard for me, I would say, pre-COVID, and even when I went freelance. So going freelance for me originally was kind of an act of self-care. I was very lucky in that the first freelance contract I got was working for Vault Festival, which is kind of a 4 or 5 month gig, doing press, which is really great. And I got the Adopt Playwright Award kind of off the, I'd say in the kind of final months of working there. So I was very lucky that my sort of first year of being a freelancer, there was kind of income from writing and from marketing and PR. And I had sort of people that I knew through kind of my full-time work, who were able to sort of offer me work. And I then went back to Vault for the 2020 festival, which is when everything kind of changed quite sharply, and we shut a week sort of earlier than we would have done because of COVID, just shutting everything down, but had 3 weeks of kind of really struggling to stay afloat. And yeah, when the kind of relief packages of freelancers got announced, I very much was one of those people who fell through the cracks. I hadn't been freelance quite long enough to qualify for any of the SEISS payments. I didn't really have any work lined up. Theatre marketing, which had been sort of my bread and butter, obviously relies on shows being on. So it's a great job when things are happening. It's a really hard job when things aren't. So that all kind of very quickly sort of pivoted. I actually moved home for 3 months. I've been in London since I was 21, and my whole career has been here. But I actually moved back to the West Country just for 3 months for the first lockdown, and then came back again. And I'd say for me, a real adjustment was going from not even 100%, probably 120% all the time. And I was kind of quite well known, and possibly looking back on it, wore it as a bit of a badge of honor that I was the busy person who spun all the plates and was always doing a million and one things. So I went from doing that to literally sleeping in my childhood bedroom with no work whatsoever and no help from the government. That was quite a flip overnight to kind of take. I think one positive of that is that it really, really made me reevaluate my working practice as an artist. First of all, I had more time than I'd ever had before. And the Adopt Playwright Award was meant to culminate in a reading, which would have happened in April 2020, which obviously didn't. The reading eventually happened in November 2021. So the kind of year I had to write a play ended up being 2.5 years. And I've only just finished that experience. And I think what was quite interesting is in the kind of lead up to that reading in April 2020, I was feeling really not great about that play, really feeling that I'd been so squeezed for time, even going freelance and trying to sort of make jobs work around it. I just hadn't quite found a way to sort of embed in my practice, actually making things work at a reasonable speed. And I knew that what I produced wasn't really what I wanted to get out of the year. And actually, in some ways, having that extra time meant that I could completely rip that script apart and build it from the ground up, which I would never have had time to do. I would also be way too scared to do pre-COVID. It just would have felt like time I didn't have to kind of experiment and play. And yeah, doing quite a lot of work online during the first 6 months, kind of taking things, nothing I took was going to pay me loads of money, but kind of taking things that I guess were kind of joyful or kind of micro commissions, but kind of allowed me to look at writing in a new way, ended up being really important. In September of 2020, when things were starting to kind of gear up again, a friend of mine who is also a playwright and also works at Vault and also does theatre marketing, we've had a very similar career history, and I decided to start a kind of marketing sort of collective. So we're still freelancers, but we work together quite a lot and we share a lot of marketing work, and we run a sort of marketing agency type thing called Cup of Ambition, which is very much designed to work with kind of emerging and mid-career artists. Something we definitely found being playwrights ourselves is that kind of juggling of loads and loads of different jobs to make your work essentially is really common, and it's like 80% of the industry. So that was very much our experience. We were kind of used to making work ourselves and doing everything for it. And we sort of felt that was a bit of a niche. And actually, it's ended up being probably the best thing to come out of the pandemic for me, is that we kind of launched a business pretty successfully. And we've been working at it for 1.5 years, and it's been great. And we've got to work with loads of brilliant theatre artists and kind of provide something that they've not had before. But definitely learnings from the pandemic for me came out of that. I would say sort of thinking about saying no as part of this panel has been really interesting. A quote that really stood out for me at the beginning of the pandemic was someone saying, "We're all in the same storm, but we don't have the same boat." which I think is completely true. Even on a freelance level, I knew freelancers who coped very badly or really had everything taken away, completely fell through the cracks, and freelancers who managed to pivot quite quickly into something else and something sustainable. And yeah, I would probably count myself very much in that first group first of all, but I was kind of lucky and I guess had the sort of connections and experience to kind of make something work out of it, which has ended up being really, really great. So yeah, I'm still kind of struggling to say no because of that rebuilding and kind of pivoting and doing something completely new. But a big thing I definitely realized is that making art, and especially art that might hold some trauma either for the artist making it, but also the audience that's receiving it, needs time and space and well-being as a kind of priority. So the two R&Ds that I've done since COVID, both have had a well-being officer in the room. One was the play that I'd written as part of the Doctor Playwright, which dealt with themes of gaslighting and coercive control. So we had a lot of support from charities and had kind of well-being on hand. And that made a huge difference to the quality of the work, and also just the ability of everyone to kind of take part and connect in it in the middle of the pandemic at that point. So it's sort of working in late 2020, early 2021. More recently, I worked on a project where I was embedded dramaturg in the room, which is working with a company of hearing and deaf actors. So there were 11 actors, 3 of whom were deaf, and also 3 interpreters. Again, check-ins, check-outs, having a well-being officer in the room, having a kind of end project activity, which was not related to anything we'd done, but was much more about coming together and evaluating. Really, really, really important. And I kind of agree with Phoebe that we're living in a really strange world now. Post-COVID, all of us to some degree have experienced trauma through the last 2 years on a kind of personal level, but also on a kind of societal, collective level. I think it's not just about protecting ourselves as artists, it's also about the way our work is received and the kind of people that we take it to and the communities that are watching it, having gone through the same thing. So yeah, while I'm not brilliant at saying no, self-care, even the really boring bits, is something that I am actively really trying to bring into my practice and embed. And I hope that wasn't too much of a ramble.
Thank you so much. Yes, that was brilliant. And I think it's very interesting because I think a lot of us multitask, and the problem is, like, even when there are many of us that are working across many aspects of the career, and it's fascinating how much hustling you have to do, even just to remember what you're doing at the moment, when you're trying to also create projects in the future and think about the things and help other people and etc. And I think that kind of noise is something that we've been out of practice in, which exacerbates our feelings now. So just to move on, thank you so much. Talking to now Harry, I'll introduce this panel. I'm hoping is not only something that is an exciting debate that we'll have discussions about, but will actually help me deal with my problems. So thank you all again. So Harry Harrington is an actor from London. He graduated from the Guildhall School of Music and Drama in 2018, but has worked professionally for 10 years. He now sits in the audition panel at Guildhall. Harry has a broad range of credits in the stage and screen and is currently performing at the National Theatre in Small Island. Harry is also very interested in all kinds of technology and has been working on a new platform for actors that looks to address the many issues that actors face in the industry. And Ali, if we can just make sure to move to Harry for the next screen, that's great. Thank you guys so much.
Hey everyone, thank you. Can you hear me okay? Because I had a bit of a nightmare. My monitor, this monitor's just broken, so I've now moved over to another one, which it saw me through the last 2 years of the pandemic, so that's good. So thanks so much everyone so far. It's as Holly was saying, it's great to hear this stuff, even just on a personal level. Like, it's just nice to hear that, you know, similar things you think about, people are thinking about, it's happening, and you're not alone. It's just good to be reminded of that, because it's all ringing really true. I graduated from I'm an actor. I graduated from Guildhall, as Holly's already said, a couple of years. No, it wasn't a couple of years at all now. It was 2018. But it was a year, about a year and a half before the pandemic sort of happened. But I think also worth mentioning potentially is that I started training at drama school at 2012. That's when I got into Guildhall, and then during like halfway through second year, I had some mental health issues that I needed to deal with, so I stepped out of drama school for a year and a half or 2 years, and then went back to do the whole thing again. Luckily still fitted within the 5 years of funding that you're allowed for a government grant loan. So yeah, so I had a super unique, I'd say, drama school experience in the sense that I had that break in the middle and it allowed buffer time to think about all of these things and all of these things to do with mental health and to do with yeah, also I suppose isolation for that period of time where I was in a sort of place. But I think hopefully that will relate to some of the stuff I go on to. So yeah, I graduated, and then I had about a year and a half before the pandemic happened. So I've just got a bunch of sort of points here, which I'm just going to relay. Hopefully they connect. They might be a bit scattered, but then that's probably like a reflection of my brain anyway. So yeah, so I graduated then, and it felt, yeah, like a lot of people. Again, I'm going to say this stuff knowing full well that I've got my own level of privilege as well, because I think it's good to acknowledge, you know, that yeah, I am like a white cis male, so there's a certain amount of privilege that comes with that in itself. So when I'm complaining, I'm also thinking about the broader range of things, including like my colleagues who were in my year and my other actors. We only had like about a year and a half to sort of gather momentum for our careers and for our acting, and then the pandemic hit, and something interesting happened, which we discussed in the micro thing. Oh, I forgot to start a stopwatch timer. There we go. Something else happened. See, where have I got? My brain's already scattered now. Yeah, so then we didn't actually have that much time to gather our stuff, and then what happened is, we spoke about this in the micro commission. The other years were sort of what happened is us, which we felt very much new graduates, was sort of there were a lot of opportunities that came out, and it was a great thing and a really healthy thing for the industry. A lot of people talking, casting directors, writers, producers, everyone talking to each other on social media and being a bit more open. So that's something that definitely came out of it. But one of the things that happened as well is that we were kind of put on the back burner, and there seemed to be this trend of people that had graduated in 2020. So it's graduates of only available. A lot of these opportunities were only available to graduates of people that graduated in 2020 during the pandemic, which again is awesome. And they had, I can't imagine sort of you know, that sort of showcase period being in that situation. But I think from talking to the rest of the year, because I also spoke to some of my year for these subjects, that was quite a thing that came up a lot. It felt like, oh yeah, you're just on the cut-off point, so this doesn't, you don't qualify. And it's like, well, what about us? We still. Yeah, and all the other things that happened, as some of you have said, like the SICE payment stuff, I didn't quite qualify. Something about I didn't fund my tax return, or I just funded it and it didn't classify. So for the first year or so, I didn't get anything. And yeah, moving home and not being able to pay rent and all that stuff was a bit of a disaster. In terms of self-care and stuff like that, I think, yeah, general self-care, which has already been spoken about, you know, having your value be other than you being a freelancer, other than you being a writer or an actor or whatever it is that you are, that is one identity, but then having your own identity that is separate from you as a performer is super important. And to be proud of that as well, be proud of yourself and your other work and your other achievements, and not forget that you're not just, like, I'm not just an actor. Because it can feel like that. In terms of saying no, that was another thing, is, yeah, saying no is really important. So I think, so Holly briefly mentioned I've created this platform, which is called the Cast Hub, which is still on the back burner I'm working on. And it's basically to be an alternative sort of casting platform, connecting platform for actors, primarily for me, but also it will extend to, you know, actors, directors, producers, writers, casting directors. And it's to really, you know, to compete with Spotlight and Mandy and all of these other things that are out there, because they're not great, and they haven't been great, and there's a lot of work on there that's very questionable. Casting breakdowns are very questionable. You know, there's a lot of inherent, and it's changing a little bit, but not very much, to be honest. Like, it's still the problem's not really gone away at all. But there are claims that it's changing. But you know, the sexism is probably the most rife thing that I see in casting breakdowns. But of course, there's tons of other, you know, there's a lot of racism and a lot of other issues with the casting breakdowns that are just, you know, have like one example I use, you know, have like a lot of them, a huge paragraph on the male character about the intricacies of how he works, and then the female character, even though she's, you know, exactly the same level of role in that particular script, will literally have like 2 lines. It's like what she looks like and how old she is, and it's usually 10 years younger than the man. And I just seeing this all the time, we got really pissed off about it. So, you know, I spoke to a bunch of my colleagues and other people, and we decided to create the Cast Hub. And it's still on the back burner because I'm trying to get funding, which obviously is another issue. But it's also about saying no to those things, especially now. There's a lot of so saying no to, of course, bad casting breakdowns and stuff like that when you feel like you should be doing work because you need to build your CV back up, but also saying no to unpaid work. There's a lot of unpaid work, especially during the pandemic and now after. There's a lot of opportunities. There was a lot of Zoom stuff. I'm sure a few of us were involved in. I definitely was, you know, a lot of Zoom readings, play readings, stuff like that. And there's a line, I think some of it was really helpful because, you know, some of it was just like, you know, friends from drama school had a play on somewhere that they wanted to work through. And that's totally, you know, that's like, I do that as a hobby. That's my thing. That's my passion. But a lot of the castings went out and stuff. And it's like, come and, you know, to read for us for free. And obviously no one's got any money. So I'm not pointing fingers here because a lot of these people didn't have any money, but there is something about saying no. This has always been a problem. It's not just the pandemic, of course, but that's really highlighted it. That if everyone says no, eventually, then we will stop doing unpaid work, and actors will stop undercutting each other because there will always be someone that's do it for free. And usually the problem with that is that the people that do it for free are the people that can afford to do it for free, and are gifted that, you know, for whatever reason, their privilege gives them the time, the space, and the money to just do it for free. You know, there's a lot of fringe work going on right now that I know of, that sort of friends are doing, that they're doing, you know, full time. This is like, you know, they've been on rehearsal for 3 weeks, but they're not being paid, and they can afford that, and that's great. But most people can't, and I just think there's a lot of power in saying no to those opportunities. I don't really agree with them, to be honest. I think there should be, I mean, there's exceptions, of course, but they should be eradicated, in my opinion. People working for free, actors working for free, it just damages the whole industry and the infrastructure. Yeah, we haven't got the funding, but there's something wrong, and it's usually, of course, at the top. So I can't point fingers at sort of, you know, producers that are trying to create work in the situation they're in. And I've only got about a couple of minutes left. So I'll just try and cover some other things that I've put here. So yeah, actors trying to undercut each other. Already done that. Yeah, you're having your value as yourself separate from an actor. Yeah, the pressure to create your own work. A lot of this has brought up stuff that was already happening, but has reinforced, the pandemic's reinforced it, which is, you know, create your own work. Oh, you haven't got any work. You've not got any work going on. There's not a castings enough for you. And a lot of the casting directors in a lot of these Zoom stuff that happened over the pandemic, I joined like all of them, took as many notes as I could. And a lot of it was, you know, it's really about creating your own work. And while I agree with that, and it's something I want to do down the line, I'm not a writer. I didn't train as a writer. I'm an actor, and I want to be used as an actor. And I don't necessarily have the skills to create, you know, my own play, or the resources or the funds. So I think that was used as a bit of a deflection during the pandemic, where it is this, yeah, and it's a lot of pressure to create your own work. And now it's like, oh, maybe I should be. So now am I no longer an actor? Am I everything. I now also a writer, director, producer, and I become my own sort of brand that I push myself out to the vaults and the bunker. And well, the bunker's not about anymore, unfortunately, but you know. So yeah, that was something that came up a lot. And it is something I want to do down the line, but it's like, you know, that's not my discipline. That's, you know, other people we have in this room's discipline, and we should be coming together as opposed to being like, I know, you know, if you stop complaining about not having any work and make your own work, it's really not that easy. Yeah, couple of quick things to sign off. This is an obvious one. In the pandemic, when things started to open up, work started to happen again. Film sets started first. Theatre's obviously still absolutely decimated, but we're doing our best. That is to not compare yourself with other people. It's so easy to see like, oh, things are starting up again. Everyone's working again. I'm not. It's okay. It's okay. It's like people aren't working, and they're really not. It's like that. You know, people aren't. They're certainly not. The paid work certainly isn't happening. You know, look around. Like people that are being paid, as we already know, for their work as a freelancer after this pandemic is like 2% of people. So not to compare yourself, treat yourself after auditions or your equivalent of an audition, even if that's just nice takeaway. And yeah, find another job that you enjoy doing as well. Have that alongside. Yeah, sorry if that's sort of scattered, but hopefully that encapsulates some of the stuff we were talking about. And thank you very much.
Terrific, thanks so much. So I think what we'll do now is we will share, Ellie, if you want to move us back to the kind of group look, that would be great. So I can have a general kind of discussion with the panelists and any questions from the audience for them about these kinds of issues of self-care and saying no, et cetera. I think there's something really, really exciting about how people are really kind of having a really big movement in the industry to not hide what's always been in plain sight. And how do we take care of ourselves? How do we advocate for ourselves when we've been conditioned for so many years to deny ourselves in order to survive in the career? So any kind of questions in the chat, and can we move to a group? I'm not sure if we can move back. So while I wait for some questions, I just want to ask everybody in the panel, do you think that going forward, what kind of active ways are you thinking about trying to change how you think about your own self-care and how you advocate for yourself in the industry?
I think an interesting one is trying to remember and keep at the heart of your practice the reason why you're making work. And I think it's really, really easy to lose sight of that. I also think that's changed post-COVID. And I think the need to make work that speaks to communities, the need for work that kind of embodies a collective experience. The first one was back in the theatre after, well, in the kind of weird hiatus in 2021 before like things kicked off again, was so joyous, and it was so magical, and it was one of the most like amazing experiences I've ever had, because it was about people being in a shared space. And I think also to come to terms with some of the stuff that's happened to us in the last couple of years, and that's entirely different for everyone. I think we're showing our work to people who've been through something that kind of happens once in a generation, and we've experienced that ourselves. So I think keeping the reason why you make art at the center of your practice can help with that. If you remember that actually I mean, for me, it's about trying to start conversations that are meaningful and important and have an impact on the world around me. It's incredibly hard to do that well if you're under-resourced and tired and burnt out and mentally not in a great place. I don't think you can do your best work. I think it's really easy, and I definitely was guilty of this pre-pandemic. There's a real kind of, I guess, sort of representation of like the kind of struggling artists in sort of wider culture and media, and that part of being an artist is like you must suffer for it, and you know, we've all got kind of trauma that we kind of are bringing out, and yet the kind of shift from trying to move away from that and remember that actually you're making work for other people and communities, and and that means that you have to bring a sort of degree of responsibility to your practice, I think can be really helpful. Don't know if I answered that well.
Yeah, no, that's terrific. Other comments from you guys? We have some questions in the chat if you want more specific questions.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can, I'll answer it better than Isabel just did, really. I would just really agree.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too. Fabulous. Brilliant.
Great. Okay, so this is from Rosie Klitsch. It's Isabel. It was interesting to hear about having a well-being officer in the room, and I'm wondering whether other changes we might take forward in terms of planning for safe, healthy production work in the future. So she's asking any changes to hours, any other costed roles like the well-being officer that might make the rehearsal room a kind of more safe space.
Honestly, it's a really good question. And I think something that I think is really important to say at this point is both the projects I worked on where kind of we had someone looking after wellbeing were Arts Council funded. So there was money for that. And there isn't always, and that's really, really difficult. I think there does need to be more from venues of helping provide that support. Because ultimately, if you're a group of artists trying to make something and you don't have the funding to do that yourself, and you're being kind of asked to provide something either out of your own pocket or kind of ignore it completely and just sort of make do, that does feel really problematic. It's something that I'd love to see more theatres have as part of their core staff. I can't really think of any theatres I've worked with where having a kind of wellbeing officer, which is not the same as an HR officer. I think that's really important to say. An HR officer is protecting the welfare of the company, not necessarily the employees. I would love to see that as a kind of staff role in theatres, especially theatres that are core funded or MPOs. That's something that I think is really, really needed. As freelancers, I feel like we're expected to take that burden on ourselves a lot and either make do without those kind of support systems or find your own funding to put them in place. And that's incredibly difficult and just getting harder. So yeah, I wish I had some really good advice on how to do that. But ultimately, I think we need to be kind of expecting it from the top down. And I think at a kind of macro level, some of the bigger organizations need to be kind of thinking about that and establishing that.
Yeah, definitely. And I also think the funders need to allow for other kinds of funding. At least the Arts Council small grants have gotten a little bit bigger, because also like often you're afraid to apply for the big grants, but if you are creating a project, you also don't have enough money to do everything you want to do, which then puts everybody under pressure and causes problems for everybody, you know, in terms of having 2-week rehearsals for a whole production,
Totally.
which I had to do.
I think,
and then you feel miserable, you know, but you can't, how do you get beyond it if they don't give you the support to do that?
Sure. I think one thing that is worth pointing out, which I sort of wasn't super aware of, but I think has maybe become a bit more well known now since COVID, is that with Arts Council grants, any access requirements don't have to fit into that budget. So I know it's like £30,000 now, it was 15,000, but you can any access costs that you need are kind of surplus to that. And also access costs as part of ACE are not just things like BSL interpreters. I've worked with a couple of artists who have things like ADHD and have a kind of a support worker to help them kind of organise information and navigate the room. That is also something that you can put in for. So yes, it's worth just knowing that that money does exist and you don't have to try and like cut other parts of your budget to fit it into that grant.
Wow, that's great. Okay, so we have an anonymous attendee who's asked, he wonders if you have any self-affirmations you use for positive self-talk that you could share.
Yes, I have a few. One that just comes to mind is that your work has value. Basically, as simple as that. But to be more specific, that a lot of the time, actors or artists can feel you can be made to feel not important, and that was obviously never more apparent than during COVID. But then again, as was popular during COVID, people said, look around you, and you know, the arts are everywhere and they're surrounding everything and lifting up everybody all the time. So just remembering that, yeah, that it's not always about, that it's not necessarily about me. That also there's a bigger thing that I like, that I'm just proud to be a part of, which is the arts. it sort of takes pressure off of me, and it makes me feel like I'm doing something worthwhile.
Great. Phoebe?
Yes, I just ripped this off my fridge. I just literally ripped it. This is the thing off my fridge, and I do yoga every day. That's like my thing. I love yoga. So good for the mind and body. But this is the thing I try to say in Shavasana when I'm like lying down there relaxing. And it just says, I am grateful, I am beautiful, I am powerful, I am becoming. And I think that like sense of becoming is like you're a work in progress, and that's like a really positive thing. Like you're always growing. So that's the thing that I try to remind myself and read when I'm going to make a cup of tea or get myself an apple or whatever. Those are mine.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. I think it also is something to kind of use for the theater industry in general, that like people, we can change. We don't have to do things the way they did in the past. Just because they did it doesn't mean it's right. So I've got one from Irini, which is, this has been really lucid and comforting discussion. The fact that the question of self-care has become a part of the discussion in the arts is already an achievement. But what is the cost of that? Is it really having to hit rock bottom in order for us to look after ourselves and each other, and how to avoid doing that? That's a good question. Phoebe?
I think for me, it's about finding the balance before you hit the rock bottom. So like when you're feeling good, that you're just always all the time going, things are going good, I haven't got loads on, but maybe that's a good thing. Like let's balance up, how much this next project is going to take up, and not just time and money and commitment, but like of you, like your commitment of self. Do you know what I mean? And like weighing it all up. And I think for me, it's about finding balance when things are good, to like keep you steady. Do you know what I mean? And then hopefully you don't hit the rock bottom. That's, I think for me, it's always about balance.
Yeah.
I think there's definitely something about a lot of self-care and basic self-care is really boring. It really is. I think we're creative people, and we want to be like big problem solvers and coming up with like amazing ideas that are going to revolutionize the industry. And I'd love to spend kind of an hour chatting about what we need to do from the top down with a group of artists, and I would like drink enough water and get enough sleep, which is really, really basic and something I just fail to do. I think that kind of remembering that kind of a lot of the really, really basic building blocks of this stuff is not exciting and it's not glamorous, and it's very easy, because we're creative and we want to change the world and solve lots of problems, to kind of get swept up in the big picture stuff and forget about that small picture stuff. And actually it's when you start forgetting about the small picture stuff that things spiral, I find.
So I've got two questions from Susan Croft. The first is, how far do you think venues and organizations can be persuaded to take these issues on board going forward in a difficult funding climate? And what is the role of unions? And then just got another question, but I'll wait till we answer this one first.
I've got, sorry, Isabel, I have just a quick one about unions, which is that so Equity recently put in place a thing about self-tapes and how long a self-tape audition, how long you would have to have the deadline, because a lot of that, one thing to remember is a lot of that for an actor, that's unpaid work, and that's no other job do you do that many hours of unpaid work. I can put hours, days into a self-tape, and that's not being paid at all. And that work, it got kind of ridiculous over the pandemic. It got, it was hours sometimes. You got it in the morning, can this be back by 5 p.m.? And Equity stepped in. However, they stepped in and they've given guidelines. So they are guidelines, which are, I think it's at least 48 hours for the deadline. There's a couple of other kind of bullet points that they put in. They're not being followed. I just think that's maybe just worth saying. There were guidelines. It came out on Twitter. People were like, "Great!" A week later, it was kind of forgotten. I'm still getting the same thing. So that is just in response to that question. That is a case where it has been heard, it has been addressed. People have gone great, and it's not been followed through. So that's a potential concern for going forward for other cases.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the thing about self-tapes is it's really also just the power imbalance of that. You know, they're now demanding so many scenes that you have to have memorized and done within like a very short window of time. And I doubt they're really looking at them all. You know, it's that they have options, but that's not safeguarding or thinking about the artist on the end of it. And that is one of the problems with the digital move. Like digital move is great in certain ways, but in other ways, it takes away the consequences, right? Or the real feeling of humanity of who's behind those tapes. And it's a tick box sometimes because they've been told you have to have more access, you have to have more availability and more people auditioning. So all they can say is, look, we've got, 1,000 people, sending us self-tapes, but they're not looking at them all. So
yeah, absolutely. And also, sorry, just really briefly as well, there's a financial element there as well. I mean, some people, and certainly going to drama school like Guildhall, some of my mates and my colleagues there, they have the craziest setups I've ever seen. It's a massive camera backdrop, massive thing. And sometimes you get you often get a thing with, can I have a full length shot? And I'm like, I don't think you can, to be honest. The wall to wall, I don't think you're going to get a full length shot.
Yeah.
And it's just assumed every time. You get one outside on the street that's going to be quite noisy. So I think that's another element as well.
Yeah. Or dialogue if you've got nobody else you're living with, or again, if you're just using your phone because you don't have the kit, which is one thing that Susan Croft was saying also, if you don't have the quality of technology to do it, it'll put you at a disadvantage, and you shouldn't be at a disadvantage because of technology you have at home, as opposed to, or your backdrop or backlighting, you know what I mean? But again, I think these are all concerns that are issues of this notion that accessibility sometimes doesn't mean accessibility, and inclusion doesn't mean inclusion. And I think that's a debate that needs to be continued to just be discussed. So just one question from Susan Croft, which is, can Isabel share information on the funding sources she mentioned in relation to ADHD?
Yeah, it's actually just the Arts Council project grant. So yeah, you obviously apply for a certain amount of money. I actually haven't been involved in one since they've changed it. So I believe it's now 30 grand for the smaller grants. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. So basically with any kind of accessibility stuff, that is separate. That's a separate budget to that kind of core funding pot. So if you're applying for a project that is going to cost 30 grand and you need to pay for BSL interpreters on top of that, that is separate. You don't need to kind of splash into your 30 grand budget to fit that in. That is a kind of whole separate thing. I haven't been involved in like writing a bid that involves access. I've been involved in a lot of projects where access has been a part of it, and that has been kind of on the like producing fundraising side of it. But certainly the last R&D I worked in as a dramaturg, where we had 3 BSL interpreters in the room. A lot of that money came from a separate access pot. There's also access to work, which does cover some of this stuff, but the Arts Council definitely funds some of it as well. Something else I've been told, but I don't want to say this is fact, is that the Arts Council don't put pressure on you to kind of show, like, I guess, the kind of need, like a kind of medically sort of qualified need. So if, for example, you're someone with ADHD or another project I worked on recently had an actor with autism in the cast. They had an access support worker, but I don't think they have to show like a kind of doctor's diagnostic note or anything like that. It was about the artist saying, this is, I know what I need to produce my best work. This is how much it'll cost, and kind of applying for it. I don't want to say that as a kind of golden rule thing, because it wasn't me applying for the kind of project fund myself. But what I would say is the Arts Council are super friendly and will chat to you and, yeah, you know, talk to you about the stuff. So it's really worth getting in contact with them before you apply and talking through what they can do.
Yeah, and I think, like, again, it's habits. Like if they create habits in the rehearsal rooms of self-care. I mean, again, like American Actors Equity, for example, though it has other issues, it forces you to take breaks. You can't work in a rehearsal room without taking breaks at very particular times, which some people could get, complain about. Well, once it becomes a norm, taking a break is a good thing. You know what I mean? And sometimes you can get tunnel vision and don't realize you haven't let people take breaks for ages or whatever, depending on, what you're doing. And these kind of little things can be huge in terms of how people feel about what they're doing. which is, it's a simple thing, taking a break, but it's also incredibly important for so many things.
I would say as well, breaks are important because we don't all have the same brains. And I say this as someone who's dyspraxic, so I am kind of neurodivergent in that sense, but also work with a lot of neurodivergent artists. The energy levels required to kind of keep focus and to kind of keep up with what's going on in a room are completely different for different people, depending on your brain. And also depending on what kind of subject material you're investigating as well. You know, something that's kind of more traumatic or bringing up quite personal memories. Breaks are really, really important for well-being and just kind of safeguarding, let alone like doing your best work. So I think just understanding that people's brains work differently and at different speeds is also really, really important, and something I've definitely become more of an advocate for, including for myself.
Yeah, definitely. Well, speaking of which, it's been really wonderful speaking to you all, and let's have a brief break. And then we will be going on to the discussion group where we can talk in much more meaningful ways. Ali is putting in the chat the discussion groups. You are more than welcome to go to the one on saying no and then move on to others if you wish. And here's the kind of information of where they are, or you can find them on GatherTown and wander around the space and find the rooms. But thank you all so much. It's been really exciting talking to you. And just to confess, it took me a long time to realize that I even had a choice to say no, you know, or that was something I could possibly ever do. And I have, you know, I go back, it's like you're an addict of it. and you have times where you get better at it, and then other times you get worse again, you know, and I think it's a process for us all to kind of heal as an industry and as a community, heal ourselves and as well as change the industry. So thank you all so much for being a part of that. And I will see you at 3:10 after the break. And just to note, after that, we then will have a brief break, and then we have the roundtable at 4 p.m. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.